I can open my window and wave to you. Yeah, well,
Almost.
obviously your book was set in the North Shore, right? I pictured Manchester by the Sea because that's where my
Oh,
son's mother-in-law lives, but you know, you can
Oh.
correct me, so.
you know, that works. But I think it was amalgamation of different aspects of different towns.
Actually, and I don't mean to take over, but I thought also it was probably Marblehead, because I think Marblehead had a bigger Jewish population. Manchester by the Sea, according to my daughter-in-law, is half and half, and she said she was like the only half Jew. There was one
That's
half
so
Jew in
funny.
town, and it was her. So okay, we'll
No,
call it
I
Marblehead.
love
whatever.
that. That's great.
And I'm in Chicago, so I'm
Chicago.
I'm
Very
at 3
cool.
o'clock.
Yeah, it's middle of the afternoon for you.
I'm in St. Paul, Minnesota.
Oh, I love it. This is so great. And what about everybody else?
Chicago.
Chicago, Sudbury, Minnesota, Boston for me, Connecticut for living. Yeah.
I'm normally based in Massachusetts.
And Spain. I love it. Okay.
Yeah.
Florida
And
Panhandle.
Annie
to the
just said
Florida
Florida Panhandle.
Oh, Florida Panhandle.
That's a
Great.
beautiful area.
I love it. This is great.
Mhm.
Why don't we get rolling?
All right.
Some people will drift in, but
Yes. Well, this is Jessica Keener, author of Night Swim. I'm really excited to hear what you have in store in mind.
Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing really from all of you. So I mean, I can start with just, the general Night Swim is about a dysfunctional Jewish family set in Boston, 1970, and also a coming of age of Sarah, who's one of 4 in the Kunitz family. But Sarah is telling the story from an adult perspective looking back. So having said that, one of my questions that I'm always interested in, if you don't mind my asking, is what you all think about the title Night Swim, and if it conjured up any kind of images or personal experiences. I'm just curious.
I had one response. I thought when I first encountered the title and saw the cover that involved skinny dipping.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one scene in the book where they skinny dip. She walks into the lake out to the cattails, and Gregory, I guess he follows her. I don't know. I forget exactly. And that's called skinny dipping. She doesn't have her clothes on, and that was. Then I had another thought about Night Swim, and sort of swimming in the night.
Mm-hmm.
And a murky life.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it made me think. My first thought was the REM song "Night Swimming," which went through my head a lot while I was reading the book. But great song. But what Christopher said, it's a metaphor, in a way, for she's trying to get away from the life of her father's life, and maybe, obviously eventually she joins her brother out in the West Coast, and but she's swimming in darkness. She's not really sure where she's going or how she's going to get there, and it's taking a lot of effort on her part to, physical effort. It's not like she's not hitching a ride, she's swimming.
Mm.
So, and at risk of drowning,
Mm. I learn a lot from people who read my book. So I just was curious. And in fact, I didn't know the REM song until after the book. I wasn't aware of that song until later, which is sort of funny. But anyone else just want to throw in their thoughts about the title? I definitely had a, I mean, I was thinking of it metaphorically at the time. And of course, water figures in and in a big way, with a mother and her night swim that happened to have a car
Mm.
involved. And then of course, Sarah later with Gregory, as you said, Christopher. So, but I do love that idea that you just mentioned, I think Lynn, that about, or maybe it was Barbara, that she had to swim on her own. And there's that sense of struggling through darkness in the novel. So I appreciate that. Thanks. So I'm also just, if you don't mind, curious to dig into the different characters. I'm curious to know what you thought about the other brothers, their different personalities, how they coped, with the chaos in the family.
I thought my favorite character is besides Sarah was a character. Was it Elliot who had the fish tank?
Well, Robert had the fish tank.
Robert.
Elliot liked his fish tank. Elliot wanted to keep touching Robert's fish tank. So,
that was my favorite scene in the whole book.
okay.
The character, the way he talked to the fish, the way he talked about the fish, and it was just touching and charming and endearing.
Mm.
The personality you give to that character,
Oh.
and as he gives the personality to the fish he holds on his lap.
Mm-hmm.
I really enjoyed him. Favorite part of the book, even more than the sex scene.
Oh, thanks. No, it was really fun actually to write that scene. I didn't expect to write that scene, and I'm not sure what entirely inspired it, but our son in real life had a fish, just a single fish, a betta fish. And I swear that thing lived. I mean, it just lived for years and years and years. And I just, I think that was probably the launching point for me to bring in a scene about, pet fish and also thinking about children, because it's often our first foray into mothering something. We get a pet turtle or, the pet fish, the goldfish. And, that's kind of our first responsibility for taking care of something other than ourselves. Not that children are taking care of themselves, but, taking on that role.
I like the way the mother didn't want to have a dog or a cat because there was too much mess involved. So he had to have a fish. And that was sort of like my family. My mother didn't want to have a dog or cat either. And my brother got a gerbil. And
that was okay.
That was okay.
They
Because
can
you
be
could
messy.
keep the gerbil in the cage. So
Yeah, right.
There was one other part of that chapter I liked especially. It was the first time. Is it Mrs. Delgarno? Is that her name?
Miss Delgarno.
Miss Delgarno gets a personality.
Yeah.
And before that, she comes across as a floozy, I would say, or just an interloper, a gold digger. But suddenly she's got a role in the family. They look up to her, they trust her, and she adopts a family and in some sort of a caretaking way, at least in situation anyway. And I think that helped the book a lot and added that dimension to that chapter that I like very much.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that was a breakthrough. I wanted it to be a breakthrough for her because, of course, Sarah just would not allow her in at all. So seeing Delgarno through Sarah's point of view was always going to be, through kind of jaundiced eyes in a way, because Sarah just did not want to let, Miss Delgarno in any way. And so that this, the cracking of the glass and everything around that, it just sort of somehow was able to break through, I think. At least that was my intention.
Yeah, it worked.
Okay. Thanks.
you know, it's going to be a long process. I mean, because we see Sarah's father with that woman when her mother's still alive at the party.
Mhm.
And that immediately casts suspicion on her, you know, like was she having an affair with him while her mother was still alive? So
Mhm.
I mean, I felt she had a long way to go to ingratiate herself with the kids, but she was working at it towards the end. Speaking of the kids, so Robert, I had the feeling he's the one who he seemed almost on the spectrum,
Yeah.
you know, which he reminded me of kids I know who are on the spectrum. And
Mhm.
I thought that was an interesting contrast too. I you know, when I was reading about him, you know, I would sort of feel a little tension in my chest from him because,
Mm.
you know, he had his own world, his own way of doing things, his own processes. And I respected them, but they were a little chilly and hard to climb over that fence and join him.
Mhm.
Whereas Elliot was just like a teddy bear. He was
Mhm.
just so sweet. And the older brother, whose name I'm blanking on right now,
Peter.
Peter. Yeah, I mean, he was a survivor. You know, I sort of resented him for abandoning Sarah, and yet
Mm.
he was paving a path for her to follow. So,
Mm.
you know, he showed her there was a way to escape. So, you know, I could forgive him a lot.
Mhm. Mhm.
One thing I wanted to say about the book, I could not put it down.
Mm.
I read it in 3 sittings. I'm a
Mm.
veteran. I was over at Veterans Drop-In Center. I read from 9 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon straight through. Then
Wow.
over at my apartment building, I read it in 2 sittings and finished just last night. I did admire the way you ended it.
Hmm.
And I was kind of a couple more things. You know, I go to school at the university. It's free if you're over 65 at the University of Minnesota.
Mm.
And I
Nice.
take writing classes, and a lot of the stuff we have to read, you kind of pray it would end.
Mm.
I didn't feel that way with your book at all. It wasn't a page turner exactly, but every time I looked at the next chapter, I just immediately started to read the thing.
Mm.
I couldn't stop reading your book. It was just excellent. Is this your first novel or?
Yes, that was my first novel.
Wow,
I wrote
something
a
else.
novel. I will tell you, I wrote a novel before that that's in the closet. So this was my first published novel.
Gosh,
So it's not that it just rolled out of me. I had spent many years writing short stories and also another novel before I completed this one. But this one haunted me for a very long time.
is there going to be a sequel to this?
Well, you ask a very good question. I am really toying with that idea. That's, I haven't made up my mind yet, but I'm toying with that idea.
Her publisher
What
might
are
be
your
interested in
thoughts?
the answer to that question also.
What's that?
I said her publisher might be interested in the answer to that question also.
Right.
I'm
Well,
not
what do
going
you
to tell
think?
you, if you write a sequel, one thing that sort of, I also felt really absorbed in the book. I mean, it really just grabbed hold and was very, I read it pretty quickly, but I wondered if in a sequel there might be more about, and I can't remember his name either, but the next door neighbor boy, which is who you start the book with.
Mhm.
And then he sort of disappears from the story.
Mhm.
And I was curious about her relation. They were best friends for a while, and then he sort of vanishes. So I wonder if you could talk about that a little.
Yeah. Well, he does sort of appear at the funeral because he's a neighbor. I do feel that all of us, or maybe I'm making an assumption, we grow up with certain sort of things that happen to us in our childhood, and it might be a neighbor, or it might be someone who was your best friend, or it was a schoolmate, and they were so sort of engaged or involved in some way in your life, and yet, you know, then we grow and move on and go to different places, and they sort of fade. And you know, and then they sort of return to this sort of Facebooky thing. I mean, I don't know about you, but I have reconnected, you know, mostly superficially with, you know, the high school person or the elementary school person, you know, who I have like maybe this one snippet of a memory. Like I remember this one woman brushed her teeth with Comet, and it actually ruined her teeth.
Yuck.
I mean, that's the kind of thing, you know, a kid would do in second grade, you know. I mean, Comet was cleaning, and this person did that. So, you know, you have these sort of fragments of, or these sharp memories of these, you know, random things that people have done that were part of your life, like in second grade, or at least I do anyway. And so, you know, what do you do with that? I mean, I would say probably I wouldn't pursue that relationship. I don't, you know, but I'm going to think about it now that you've mentioned it. But I just am sort of interested in how things that seem to be so distant are sort of part of us in some way. And so his email at the beginning of the novel, you know, it did bring her back. And he was there during this very critical, difficult time in her life. And I think, again, I don't know if this, you know, like if you've had a nickname when you were growing up, and sometimes you run into a person and they call you by that old nickname, which nobody knows and nobody uses anymore. But it definitely puts you at a certain time and place, because that's what people called you at that time, you know. And it's all there in us. So I guess I was sort of interested in that aspect, and that's how I saw Mickey as functioning for the novel. But you know, I'll think about what you said if I decide to go down that road.
I wanted to talk about Sarah's involvement with music. I thought it was really interesting how it was really important part of her character, and how she was, you know, she sang in the school plays and she got the lead role. And I have to thank you for giving me Aquarius, which was stuck in my head for weeks after that. I had to look up the lyrics because I kept hearing Aquarius over and over in my head. But I have a feeling that you and I are the same age, you know, and she grew up at the same groups that were popular, the same musical situation around her, and it seemed like music helped her achieve some kind of personality. It helped her achieve some kind of maturity. It was something that helped her grow.
Well, I'm sure before I say anything, I'm just curious if anyone else has thoughts about that.
I thought it came off a little bit as like a escape for her. And the escape ended up being obviously bigger as time went on.
I think you had to plant the seed when she was a child so that we would understand why she was a singer as an adult, you know, which is where, again, the book begins. I think in that intro, you know, prologue sort of chapter, she's going to go and sing someplace. So, you know, you kind of built it very organically. That's the word.
The first thing I noticed in the book, I think it's in the first, even before the book starts, is the attributions of the publishers of the songs you use.
Well, let me tell you about all that.
Those agencies, and how did you get permission without spending an awful lot of money?
Well, I had a lot more quotes of lyrics, a lot more lyrics initially. And then when I realized what that meant in terms of asking for permissions from the publishers and the music, you know, for the various music, for the songs who owned the publishing rights, it was not a nightmare, but it was close to one. And I realized this is just way too complicated for me and my and my book. So I pared them down actually because to make it manageable, but I did actually have to contact all the songs that are in there. I contacted the publishers and asked for permission. And, I don't even know if I really needed to do it for all of them because sometimes I only used, a line or so. And I don't think they really start complaining until you've used maybe more than a line. But I felt a certain obligation to make sure I did the right thing. So there were various fees and also it opened my eyes to how convoluted the publishing industry is for the music industry, because everyone had a different publisher, and then you had to get in touch with managers, and some of the publishers were overseas, and it was a very complex, convoluted trail.
And there's no
So,
standard scale for it, which is just unbelievably frustrating.
and no standard. Yep.
Yeah.
Bob
With
Dylan's
everything
manager
being
didn't care.
negotiated in well, like in the film industry, for example, with everything is based on a scale. There was nothing in the music world. And so I remember prior to his days with Game of Thrones, George R.R. Martin wrote a novel called The Armageddon Rag, which had every chapter opening had a large snippet of a song. And he said that he had to get permission for all of them, and some people were just terrific and basically said, sounds great, feel free to use it, and others wanted thousands of dollars for the use of a stanza.
Right.
And it was always a negotiation.
Yeah, that's what I found. Joni Mitchell's group was very strict, and I think Dylan didn't care, and others just had kind of nominal fees.
Mhm.
And I think I never ran into something that was just so exorbitant, because I would have just dropped it out. I would have probably eliminated it from the book at that time. But that was and music is so important to this book, so I didn't want to forgo all lyrics. It just felt important. And so what I want to say about the music is, of course, there was the mother, and music for her was fraught with a lot of despair, because she was a gifted violinist, and then because of her rheumatoid arthritis, whatever, was unable to play. And so in some ways, the loss of that for her mother led to her mother sort of drying up in a way. And then but yet the kids, Peter, Sarah, inherited sort of a musical gift. And for them, it kind of gave them some life in a situation that was suffocating at times. And it gave, I think, Sarah a voice. And as you said, an escape, and also a place to express herself. And maybe to give her a sense of some empowerment and a way to be seen. So, performing and all that. Because she and most of the kids, I think, in the family did not feel seen. The parents were just really wrapped up in themselves and in that world. So, and then on a personal level, I used to sing. Then I had a bone marrow transplant, and I had to take male hormones, and it messed up my voice, and I could no longer sing. And for a long time, music was a big part of my life. And so this was my way and my opportunity to sort of live through Sarah a little bit, and bring music back into a book that I was writing, and a story, and the importance of music.
She becomes free when she sings.
Yeah. And I think music is that way. It's another part of the brain. And this is kind of a wild thing that I'm going to say, but I watched this movie. It's called The Weeping Camel. Has anyone seen that? It was a documentary, and it was filmed by these two grad students, and they were in like Mongolia or something. And there was a problem with one of the camels, and that was their livelihood, the camels. And one of the camels gave birth, but was rejecting the baby camel. And they were just distraught about it because this was their livelihood. And so they tried everything to get the mother-child to bond. And finally, they went and got the special magic musician person that was like miles away. And they went on their horse to get the musician. And this is all true. Brought the guy back, and he had a special like 3-string instrument. And it was the ceremony that he performed. And he played this music in front of the camel. And it softened, I don't know, it had this softening effect for the mother that had been rejecting the baby. And then maybe it resulted in the baby and the mother bonding after this incredible, miraculous thing that happened that's documented in this film. So I do feel that music has a very strong healing power to it. And I do feel that it, that helped her, in such a, time of grief and to move forward. So I recommend that movie, but it's long. It's a family joke. You have to like really wait to get to the moment, and then it's amazing. But anyway,
It's really interesting how her relationship with music changed, like the before mother dying music and the after mother dying music, like the way that she kind of pictured it.
Oh, you mean in the novel?
Yeah.
Oh, what do you mean? Tell me more about that.
Like her relationship with music before, like she didn't really like, yeah, she had it in her life and everything, and it was a part of her. But then after her mother died, especially considering how it happened on that night, that her mother had made a deal about this other girl who was an amazing singer and everything. And I don't think it was exactly just because of like her wanting to be like this girl that her mother clearly admired, but I think that a big part of it was also like a connection that she had with her mother after she died. And I think that that was a big thing for her for music as well. Like it was definitely a bit of an escape when her mother and her dad were fighting, and like she was trying to practice piano and stuff like that.
Right.
In that sense, but it kind of takes it beyond that when her mother dies, because it becomes still a bit of an escape, but also like a reconnection, I guess, was kind of how I was picturing it.
Wow, no, that's really interesting. I hadn't really thought it out in that regard, but there is that kind of otherworldly aspect, I think. Thank you for that.
You were really good with dialogue too, Jessica. I was thinking about this interview just a couple of minutes before it opened up, and your dialogue picks up gradations and shades of meaning and shades of the emotions of the characters, even from word to word. I write too, and I write dialogue, but your dialogue is you get the feeling of the character as you write it, and which I think is great. I think it's great, especially the scene I can remember is when the father is chasing Sarah down the road, and he's in the car and he's trying to get her, and his voice changes as he chases her down the road, from coaxing her to demanding, to all kinds of different attempts, and that's I think that's hard to do instead of a flat monotone set of statements.
Well, thank you. Well, again, I think there's musicality to dialogue and to our voices, whether we're speaking or singing. So, I do feel very sensitive to the tone of a voice and how, whatever it is that we say, you can say goodbye in a million different ways. You can say it in a welcoming way, angry, dismissive, so I'm interested in all that too. So, and I should say I'm fascinated by it, in terms of how our voices engage each other or don't engage each other, push each other away or bring us together in how we speak.
You're very good at it. Very good at it.
Well, thank you so much. Appreciate
it. Works. It works.
Well, thank you.
Jessica, could you talk a little about Sarah's father? Because I really hated him. He was awful. He was just an awful person. He was, he was so insensitive to the needs of his children. He married her mother for the money, I felt, she came from a wealthy family with the furniture factory, was it, or something like that? Furniture stores.
Shoe, yeah.
And, oh, shoes, okay. But yeah, talk about him a little. Where
Well,
did
let
he
me
come
hear
from?
else what other people think first too. Without, don't worry about, I love that you just came out and said you hated him. That was great. So
That doesn't mean, I mean, he
That's-
was as a character. I mean, I'm not,
Yeah.
that is not a criticism of the book. He just
Yeah.
as a character was
yeah,
a
no,
very.
I understand.
Okay.
I'm glad that he was alive enough for you to have such a strong reaction,
Yeah.
But I'm curious to know what you all thought, or what your response was to him.
I thought he loved his children very much, but he had trouble expressing it.
Mhm.
Yes, while I would agree with that, I don't think that I think that after the mother died, that the way that he reacted to it, especially with how soon he got together with the other woman, I think that that was a portrayal of how he might have loved his kids a lot, but he didn't really take them into account when it came to making decisions that would affect them.
Yeah,
Mhm.
like selling the house too. I mean, he just sort of sold it right under them. They've lost their mother and now they're losing their home. It was, he was really not plugged into their needs at all. But I'll shut up now and let other people
No,
give their opinions.
talk away. It's fine. So, I mean, I guess you could say it's a classic narcissist, right? I mean, he was so absorbed with his own pain and his own worries and his own life that he couldn't see beyond that to what other people might be experiencing. And yet, I have to say I have affection for him. I mean, I think he's impossible. And yet I guess I probably feel that there's a lot of he has his own despair, I guess. He probably never felt good enough about himself. And so that makes me feel a little more, oh, what's the word? I don't know. I don't want to say understanding. I don't really want to say empathetic, but just, maybe I have a little bit of a soft spot for him for that reason, because I feel that his sometimes ridiculous and, totally self-absorbed behavior was really just a sign of insecurity and his own sort of despair. I don't know if that rings true for anybody.
I mean, I felt
totally agree.
sorry for him. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to step on you guys. I just said I felt sorry for him at times, but I still wanted to smack him upside the head.
Yeah, I get that totally. And that was part of the pain for the children, for and for Sarah. They were constantly having to deal with this maelstrom in their house, just his personality. So tell me what you think about the Black Maids. Speaking of the craziness in the family and, all of that, do you have any thoughts about?
Well,
Well,
that
very
was
well.
something. Oh,
Go
excuse me.
ahead.
That was something that I personally never lived with. In Chicago, people don't have Black maids. I mean, it's just not done. And I grew up in a middle class family, and you'd have a cleaning lady come over, but nobody had Black maids, and that was kind of one of those things where if you did, people looked at you funny,
Mhm.
And so I had a hard time dealing with that whole situation that they were so warm together and they were almost like part of the family, because I've never experienced anything like that.
the part I liked was about the Black Maids was Dora. She was so understanding, especially after Sarah's abortion. And she kind of acted as the only oasis of sanity in the whole family, and acted with love and helped out and loved the family, and she probably even loved the father too. She seemed the only person who really had it together, so to speak, or was a grounded human being.
Yeah, she was grounded. I don't know if she loved the father, but I think she probably saw him as another child, you know, that was out of control. But I do feel that this aspect of the Black maid and upper Jewish middle class families is where I grew up in New England was rather, it was common, a common thing. Common in the sense, I mean, I don't know how to, not the word common, but it wasn't unusual. And for a certain strata of Jewish households. And it was, maybe even a status symbol. And as I said in my afterward, like, sometimes almost stepping in as for absentee parents. And I just, it was something that I grew up with, and I really wanted to talk about it. I wanted to show it. Because I don't feel like I sort of feel like it's not talked about, or like you just said in Chicago, you never saw that, which that's interesting to me because I didn't know that. But I saw a lot of it in the town that I grew up in, which was Newton, which had a lot of upper middle class Jewish households, and they had, day maids or live-in maids. So, because a lot of times we talk about the Black maid in the South or whatever, but this is just something different. And I wanted to sort of bring that to life and have it be something that, people think about, because it was out there, and maybe it's still out there. I don't know.
It seemed very, very representative of the era that the book is set in, that the story is set in. I mean, I did not grow up in an upper middle class community. It was a middle class community, but we used to see vans of Black cleaning ladies brought out from New York City. They would come out in a van, they'd be dropped off around neighborhoods, they'd clean houses, they'd get back in the van and be driven home in the evenings. We had a cleaning lady a couple of times, but my mother never liked the way they did anything, which was unfortunate because she liked the way I did it. So I ended up cleaning the house instead. This was very much of the 60s, seems to me. There were a lot of things in the book that really anchored the period that you said it, including the abortion episode, which was, I guess, how those things happened in the 60s. A lot of things that sort of just lit a spark in my head and said, oh yeah, I remember when times were like that. I remember that kind of thing. So, I mean, I accepted that, what I think you successfully avoided doing was, there's a term, the magic Negro. I don't know if you've ever heard of that in literature and films and stuff. And you avoid it. For those of you who don't know, that's usually a sort of a token Black character who saves the white people, who is so good and so kind and so perfect. And you managed to make these women human. They did not come across as, because there were the two of them, and they did not come across as magic Negroes. So.
Yeah, I totally agree about the timeline thing too, because I feel like a lot of the book was like a lot of the experiences in the book to me seem very universal in the sense of like timeline and age. Like there were definitely elements that pointed to me that it was happening in like the 70s and everything. But for me, who didn't grow up in that time period, a lot of the things I was like, oh yeah, like this is a universal experience, especially like the drunk mom kind of thing and the taking pills and everything like that reminds me of Marblehead moms in some degree, but the difference is that they don't have that extra support from someone that is like ingrained in the family. They only have this family unit, and I feel like that is like a positive extension, I guess, because there is this other person that is there experiencing this, and that kind of like can take the kids' sides in a way, as opposed to the just having these two parents as role models without having other people that have like a look into your life that can give you a little bit of guidance that is a little better.
No, that's interesting. Well, I did think I wanted also to, in terms of the Black live-in maid, I mean, how do I talk about this? There, you know, there's just this chaotic family, and they're just, you know, there weren't a lot of job options for Black women. I mean, you know, that was one of them, you know, and so I guess I want to address that too. I mean, I wasn't consciously saying I want to address this, but it was a reality, and you know, and a bothersome reality, because, you know, there just weren't a lot of options for Black women except to go clean someone's house, you know, whatever, you know, there was, I don't have to list jobs that Black women have, whatever, but now what I think has happened is a lot of people of color who are caretaking are now in the assisted living institutions, also low paying and not valued enough by our society, and, you know, not getting the pay and the benefits and the vacation time and all of that. And I just think people need to be thinking more about that. I was just watching a documentary that was produced by the Obamas, and it's called Working, or What We Do, or something like that. And it was profiling different like technology people, and then the caregiver industry. And 65% of the people working in caregiving industry are people of color, but just such a low paying job for the work that they do. So, you know, just these discrepancies in society that continue on from back in 1970 to today. So, you know, I guess in that regard, I'm not so sure this novel is that outdated in terms of when it was, you know, what's going on, because of what we're dealing with today. A lot of these issues, they continue with, you know, racism and reproductive rights and all of that. So, so that was a curious thing to reread Night Swim after, you know, 8 years or whatever it was. I hadn't read it, and then Lou and I decided to bring it out again because, you know, it's sort of dealing with the stuff we're still dealing with in many ways, and mental health too. That was another aspect of this novel. I'm curious to know what you think, just, you know, in terms of how the school handled what Sarah went through, and if you think it would be different today.
I'll speak to that. I'll take a chance and admit it. I've had serious mental health issues myself, very serious mental health issues myself. I was in the military, and when I got out of the service, 4 years later, I had a breakdown. And at the time, there were no resources. It was either the psych ward or the street. And now, these days, there are resources all over the place. At the VA, there are more psychologists than there are anything else. And I don't know where to start to talk about resources, so I won't. But
well, I'm glad to hear that you've experienced
tons of them.
I'm glad to hear that.
The majority of the homeless in San Francisco, the single males, are frequently veterans of any of the wars up to and including the most recent in the Middle East. I don't think they're reaching one, I don't know what the statistics are, but they're not reaching any huge percentage of people effectively, because so many of those, and there are so many nonprofits that now are addressing individually the kinds of things that veterans from every war that are still surviving. And that's just happens to be the way it's been. So, and it's not just there, it's in all of the big cities, New York,
Mhm.
whatnot. I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah.
I had a question about your, it sounded as though the woman who did the housekeeping and caring in the home, the black maid or housekeeper or what have you, it was suggested there was a stabilizing force in her, and I was curious about how that you started to talk about it, or someone did, and then they went on to something else. But and it's very much reminded me of Faulkner with is it Sanctuary? Everybody remember which one of the novels it is? Come on, we all read them.
There's a whole relationship with a black maid in Sanctuary, yeah.
Yes, there was, and she ended up being the sacrificial lamb, if you will, for the family by pretty extreme scene where she actually takes the infant child and kills it, so that she will be, so that the family is saved as a result of what she's done, because they've come together, type of thing. And I may be misquoting, but I do remember it being very extreme. And so when you mentioned that she was someone who seemed to have, your maid seemed to have her feet on the ground, so to speak, who was substantial in her ability, and that she had all of these various people in the family who had all kinds of problems individually, together and alone. And I wondered if any of that prior Faulknerian type of influence came about over time. You may have had kind of, without knowing it, included that kind of thing, that theme from
Yeah,
back then.
well, that's interesting. No, I wasn't conscious of that. I mean, I think I was probably pulling more from, personal experience.
Oh, okay.
Is what I think,
Yeah.
in my case, but I definitely did want to create. I didn't see Dora as a savior for the family.
Right.
I did see her as grounded, and not for a second, was she fooled by anybody's, any of the
She saw it all
and yeah,
Yeah.
that she wasn't seeing anything she hadn't seen before.
before.
And there was a kind of, in that, so yeah, you couldn't get anything past her for sure.
That sounds very realistic. Yeah.
Which I liked about her. It was like, yay, somebody is,
Somebody's got it together.
family, and, even Delgarno, I mean, she has her own agenda, and Dora it was a job, and she was going to do her job. And she also was just an intelligent woman who could see through things. So that's how I saw her. So,
Yeah.
and it was an opportunity to present an adult for Sarah, that was more stable or anchored than what she'd experienced at home.
Yeah.
Jessica, you mentioned that it was 8 years, you said, between readings of the novel?
Yeah, I mean, it came out 10 years ago, but I hadn't read it for 8 years, I think, where I hadn't sat down and just read it.
Yeah, I'm curious what that first experience was like of reading the novel after 8 years.
Okay, well, I'm going to sound like, beating my chest here, but I loved my novel. What can I say?
Great to hear.
I felt really proud of it. And I thought, it felt relevant, and it felt like the sentences held up, I liked the characters, and so I surprised myself. I mean, it's a strange experience sometimes to read. I'm sure you go through this, all of you, any of you writing, that when you've read something that you haven't read in a long time, it's almost as if someone else wrote it, you know. At least that's what happens to me. So I think that's why I decided to go ahead, right, and do the
Yeah,
anniversary.
yeah.
There's no
I
way
was,
I
I
would
was
have.
wondering
I
if
didn't
lived
felt
experience.
otherwise.
Yeah, no, I was
Um,
wondering if lived experience had any had changed your perspective in any way on any of the novel.
Oh, in terms of how I saw it,
Yeah,
yeah, I mean, yeah, I think so. You know, the whole aspect of, I guess, the Black maids, I just was thinking about that a lot more. You know, reproductive rights, again, was thinking about that more, but also the mental health issue, just, you know, knowing in some ways that we've made a little bit of progress, but that there's just so much more we need to do in the schools. At least that I saw, you know, with you know, family members in a more recent time since the 70s. And in some ways, I guess I liked thinking about family dynamics again. It was just fun to get deep into an intimate setting of a family, and to think again about how each member has some impact on the other. And I guess those are the things that I probably was thinking about. What was it for you after not reading it for a while?
well, I mean, certainly the writing, but see, I came to it from a completely different place, because the first time I read it, it was like, wow, this is wonderful. You know, and the writing is wonderful and all that, and that wouldn't necessarily, from an outside perspective, wouldn't necessarily change. I think when you're inside of it and you haven't seen it for a while, I think, you know, certainly my own experiences, when I go back, I recently did this, and you know, I'm a somewhat different person than I was 10 years ago when I wrote my novel Blue, for example, and that, revisiting that, you know, I was bringing new stuff to it, and it wasn't about writing skill, and I can't imagine that it was about writing skill ever for you, but it was about just having lived more time, that it felt different that time, and I was just wondering if you'd had any kind of similar experience, and I guess you did to a certain extent. How little had changed, I think, probably was kind of, you know, bracing for you.
Well, I think I appreciated it more because when you said you read it and you went, wow, I was like, I wasn't feeling that way at the time. You know, I mean, it was too close. It was too close to me. And so really, I have to thank you for shining a light on it, because you helped me in that way. I was just too close to it at the time. And you were someone from the outside looking in. And so then now I became someone outside looking in, I guess, 10 years later. But thankfully I wasn't horrified. You know, the one in the closet, I would not, that needs work. So.
Or the sequel. There's
Yeah,
just so many
to go back to something you were asking earlier about, one of the things that really struck me about the book, and again, I'm of your generation too, was that teenagers in that era were they were much more liberated, much less observed. I mean, that her brother could hop on a bus and go to California, that she could get on a plane with her friend and fly to New York for an abortion, that, I mean, the parents, you know, or the smoking in school. I mean, you know, I remember the big deal in my school was to make it into the honor society, because that way you could use the honor society lounge, which was where we all smoked pot between classes. I mean, people did stuff like that then. Today, you know, kids are so carefully watched. They are so carefully monitored. The helicopter parents, the schools, you know, grief counselors. When somebody died, you know, in those days, you didn't have a grief counselor. You were told you crawled into curled up in a ball and cried. Nobody was there. Nobody went to therapy, you know. It was a very different era, and it was a real walk down memory lane for me reading that, all that stuff, just
Mhm.
bringing all of that back, how very differently our generation was raised compared to millennials or Generation Z or whatever they're being called these days. I don't know. Whether
Yeah,
we go after Z, we go back to A, I don't know.
yeah, right.
But
We're in Generation Alpha now.
Alpha, yeah, see, so now we go
Oh, we
Greek after
did.
we've
Oh.
used that.
Interesting. Yeah, the code of silence. I mean, the not talking about difficult things, you know, was just so palpable back then. And I honestly think it still is today. I mean, I think there are more resources, but I don't know how well it's been integrated and how well people are actually bringing it into their life, you know, or even if they know how to.
I wrote a book about my mental health battle and talk about it freely. I just did to talk about it about 10 minutes ago, and I talk about it all the time. And I sold about 300 copies of the book. And I belong to several organizations here in town, and I talk about it freely. It's
Well, I
my way.
appreciate that.
Yeah, it's my way of handling it.
I really appreciate that. And I think, you know, go
I
ahead.
think people can talk about it a little more today than they could then, or just like, as I said earlier, that, you know, I felt Robert was on the spectrum, but nobody even knew what the spectrum was back then.
Yeah.
You would just say, this is a weird kid, you know, and that would be the end of it.
Mhm.
Whereas now people are, I hope, becoming more willing to address mental illness as just an illness the way we address any other illness. I would hope so. I you know.
I know
Yeah.
that I'm of the same generation that you are, and my mother died when I was right out of college,
Mm,
and it was one of those things where nobody wanted to talk about it. It
mhm.
was, you know, if you brought it up, they just like clammed up completely. And so and who went to therapists? Nobody ever went to therapists. So it is a situation where I really felt what Sarah was feeling, because it really brought me back to my life.
Mm.
Yeah.
That must be hard.
I think that like therapy still has like a taboo kind of thought process with it, which is frustrating. But mental health, I think that the biggest thing that has changed so much, and obviously I'm speaking from only having grown up in the last 20-25 years, and like talking about it, people will talk about it, but it's still not like, but they're not talking about their feelings. They'll talk about the idea of mental health a bit more, which obviously that's really important, and it helps to destigmatize the conversation, but it definitely needs, obviously there's a long way to go, but I think that the bigger thing is that like the step further is that people need to actually talk about how they're feeling instead of just talking about the concept of feelings.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think so, again, you know, Christopher, I think what you're doing is a very powerful thing,
Yeah.
because you're actually, you know, you're in a sense, you're walking your talk, you know. And I think most people are not quite there.
Jessica, I have a book that's under consideration with a story plan. It is about a soldier who has a nervous breakdown in Vietnam
Okay.
and spends a large part of his life trying to cure it with the outdoors.
Mm.
To a lot of people.
Wow. No, that's powerful.
I have not heard from the publisher.
We're not ignoring you, Christopher.
I know.
Yeah.
I guess, I don't know, to maybe a wrap up, or you know, Christopher mentioned what his favorite scene were, or, you know, anyone want to throw out maybe a favorite aspect or otherwise?
Terrific book. Terrific book. It's just outstanding.
Thank you.
First novel or not first novel, it's just a terrific book.
Thank
I
you.
was very impressed, especially like, I think I had like 30 or so pages left. And I was waiting to like be in like the perfect place and position, and everything needed to be perfect for me to finish it, because I was like, I don't want it to end. And it was just so good. And I was like blown away.
Yeah, I felt the same way, Elizabeth. I didn't want it to end.
Mm.
So a lot of the stories you read at the university, even by big names, you want them to end. But
Often.
I didn't want your book to end.
Well, for those
Well, it
who
was the kind of
want to
book-
continue to experience Jessica Keener's work, there is another novel not published by the Story Plant, so this is not a commercial. Strangers in Budapest, which is another brilliant novel by Jessica Keener. There is the story collection published by the Story Plant, Women in Bed, and stay tuned for more.
Right.
Watch
Yeah,
this
I just-
space.
I've just completed another novel, so hopefully you'll all be reading it next year.
Right.
Well, thank you all for reading it, and I really appreciate your comments. I do learn a lot from people who have read it. Just things that you've all said today have now made me see the book differently, and different aspects of it. So I appreciate that very much.
And I know that you said you wanted to find out, make sure you knew where everyone's from. And I just wanted to ask Renee, where are you from? Where are you tuning in from? Your mic is off.
I said I grew up in New Jersey and I lived in the metropolitan area, but I spent a lot of years in DC, where it's
Mhm.
okay to go to shrinks and all the time because everybody does. Maybe
I
the
love that.
president doesn't, but everyone else. And I lived out in California, where it's also very in, so to speak, to
It's
be a
almost
little
required.
crazy. In fact, I think it's a requirement. So, I finished a book and I'm finishing the last bit of editing with the publisher for that deals with mental illness, and but it's fiction based largely on some very real things that occurred in mid to late 60s.
But where do you live now?
Ormond Beach, Florida.
Oh, so you're in Florida. Okay, got it.
Not my favorite place, but
Huh?
you know,
All right. So
you are what you are.
no,
Fortunately.
because I'm doing a 50 state virtual book club tour with Night Swim. So I'm
Oh, and
trying
you're going to be
stop
down here,
all 50 states. What?
and you'll be down here.
Virtual.
Oh,
So-
virtual. Okay,
Virtual. So I'm
that's
meeting with
wonderful.
book clubs.
Yeah.
So my target is to meet with a book club in every state. So I'm going to include, since you all are coming from different states,
This
this
all counts.
I'm taking advantage of
Okay,
that a little
that's
bit.
wonderful.
Um,
And Sylvia is from Omaha, Nebraska.
wow, that is cool. I've never been to Nebraska. Yeah, because I'm also curious, because I think people from different parts of the country are gonna, just like what you said in Chicago, they've never had this, they're gonna, it's just gonna be experienced differently. and I'm
Differently.
curious.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Definitely. Any last thoughts from anyone about the book or anything?
Beautiful book. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Masterful ending.
Thank you. Gosh, can I take you home?
I don't know if that ending was deliberate or not, but it worked beautifully.
Oh, what do you mean by deliberate? You were.
Well, It's sort of a hanging ending, a
Hmm.
little bit. People are still stuck with each other. They're stuck with the family, but they're going places at the same time. You can see them pulling out, running away, things starting to form and reform
Mm.
in the family, and
Mhm.
you described that beautifully right the last few pages.
Mhm. Well, hence the thinking about possibly, who knows, not saying yet, sequel.
Yeah,
All
Thank
right,
you.
well, thank you so much. I had a great time, and I loved hearing everyone's thoughts on the book.
Thank you. Really.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good rest of your day.
Bye.
thank you.